They saw a kid in handcuffs and thought they knew the ending. Just another young black man with no defense, no chance, no voice. But I didn't walk into that courtroom to beg. I walked in ready. While they smirked, I studied. While they dismissed me, I listened. And when I finally spoke, the silence said everything. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was standing up for every story like mine that never got heard. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. I could feel the stares before I even reached the defense table. That heavy kind of silence that settles over a room when people think they already know who you are and what you're guilty of. I was 19, black, and standing alone in a courtroom packed with people twice my age. That was enough for most of them to write me off before I ever spoke. The Los Angeles County Courthouse had that familiar courthouse chill, too much air conditioning and not enough warmth. I adjusted my collar and kept my hands in my pockets, not because I was nervous, but because I knew what was coming. I'd studied trials like this for years. I just never expected to be the one on the docket. The judge, Walter Grayson, looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience between him and his golf game. He didn't see a kid who knew case law like the back of his hand. He saw what he expected to see: a young black man accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. Another statistic, another name on a file. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers, barely interested. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" he said, half laughing. "This isn't a debate club, kid." Laughter bubbled in the courtroom, small but sharp. The bailiff cracked a smile. The stenographer shook her head. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, didn't even try to hide his amusement. He looked at me like I was just a warm-up to his real cases. I didn't flinch. They all thought I was about to beg for mercy or trip over my own words. What they didn't know was that while other kids were out partying, I was reading trial transcripts. While my friends played video games, I was memorizing Supreme Court decisions. My mother worked as a paralegal. I grew up listening to stories of shortcuts, bad arrests, and buried truths. This courtroom might have been theirs on paper, but I knew it better than most of them ever would. Grayson sighed and opened the file like he was skimming through a menu. "Let's make this quick," he said. "I've got a tea time at 2. The gallery laughed again. But something shifted, quiet, almost invisible. I smiled, not wide, just enough to know something they didn't. He'd already made his first mistake, and I hadn't even opened my mouth yet. The prosecutor stood like he had already won. Mitchell Carrington wore a tailored suit, his tie perfect, his voice smooth and practiced, like someone who'd rehearsed this speech in the mirror 100 times before walking into court. He spoke to the judge with that polished tone professionals use when they're used to being believed, not questioned, not challenged. "Your Honor," he began, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was found at the scene of a stolen vehicle, fingerprints on the wheel, witness statements, flight from the police. This is not a complex case. The facts speak for themselves." I watched from the defense table, hands folded, posture straight. I didn't react. Not yet. "Let them get comfortable," Carrington went on, confident, almost smug. "We'll present the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who observed the defendant in the driver's seat before the arrest. This was a clean pursuit, Your Honor. No procedural irregularities. The arrest was made by the book." Judge Grayson nodded like he'd heard the song before, and liked the tune. "Sounds pretty straightforward," he said, glancing at me with the same mild disdain he'd shown since I entered the courtroom. I looked toward the public defender next to me. Lisa Thornton. She was a decent person, I could tell, but she'd barely said 3 words since we sat down. She looked nervous, like she knew this wasn't going to end well if she didn't get a miracle. She stood, cleared her throat. "Your Honor, my client." I placed a hand gently on her arm. She looked at me, startled. I nodded, silently asking her to let me speak. She hesitated, then slowly sat back down. I stood. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went still. For a moment, all I could hear was the buzz of fluorescent lights and someone shifting in the gallery. Judge Grayson blinked. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself," I repeated. My voice was calm, clear, no tremble, no hesitation. A few people in the courtroom chuckled under their breath. Carrington actually laughed. One of those sharp, short laughs that people do when they think they're watching a train wreck in slow motion. "This should be interesting," he muttered. I didn't respond. I adjusted my jacket, took a step forward, and let the silence stretch. Just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I'd spent years preparing for this moment, even if I never expected it would come like this. I knew how people saw me. Too young, too black, too street. But I also knew something they didn't. I understood this system. I had studied it, observed it, deconstructed it, and now I was about to test it. "Your Honor," I began, "before I respond to the prosecution's claims, I'd like to confirm something on the record." Grayson raised an eyebrow, mildly curious. "Proceed." I turned to Carrington. "You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally witnessed me behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle. Is that correct?" Carrington gave a patronizing nod. "Yes, it's written in the officer's report." I nodded. "And that report is part of the state's official evidence?" "It is." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss Officer Ruiz's testimony." The judge squinted. "On what grounds?" I took a deep breath and pulled my hands from my pockets for the first time. My palms were dry, steady, controlled. Because Officer Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the vehicle was spotted. In fact, he wasn't present until well after the suspect fled. His testimony conflicts with his own GPS logs for that night. I heard the murmur ripple through the gallery. Carrington's brow furrowed. "Excuse me. I request that the court subpoena Officer Ruiz's GPS records," I said. "If he was where he claimed, the logs will show it. If he wasn't, well, then we have a problem." Judge Grayson looked toward Carrington. "Counselor?" Carrington hesitated, just long enough for the jury and everyone else to notice. "No objection, Your Honor," he finally said. But the tone in his voice had changed. The confidence had cracked. I let that moment hang in the air. It was the shift I'd been waiting for. The point when the room stopped seeing me as a kid playing dress-up and started seeing me as something more dangerous. Prepared. I turned to face the jury box, speaking slowly, making eye contact. "The prosecution wants you to believe this is open and shut, that because I'm young and black and live in a certain neighborhood, it's obvious I'm guilty. But look closer. The evidence has gaps. The testimony is flawed. And they've built a case on assumptions, not facts." I wasn't yelling. I wasn't posturing. I was simply inviting the truth into the room and letting it speak louder than the laughter ever had. Judge Grayson rubbed his temple like he was starting to realize his afternoon was no longer going according to plan. And I hadn't even gotten to the real evidence yet. But I could feel the room shifting. Their laughter had faded. Their doubt had grown quieter. I wasn't the story they expected, and that was exactly why they were starting to listen. The thing about a courtroom is this. Most people assume it runs on facts, on evidence, on truth. But it doesn't. It runs on confidence, on who speaks first, who speaks loudest, and who people expect to be right. I had none of those advantages walking in. But what I did have? Time, preparation, patience. Now it was my turn to speak. "Let's revisit the officer's testimony," I said, turning to the judge. "The prosecution claims Officer Ruiz personally witnessed me behind the wheel of the stolen Audi. That's the foundation of their case." Carrington tried to jump in. "It's not the foundation." I raised a hand gently. "With respect, Counselor, your opening statement framed Ruiz's account as a primary element of the arrest." Judge Grayson nodded, almost against his will. "He did." I continued. "Now, I've reviewed the timestamp of the incident and compared it to Officer Ruiz's patrol log. There's a gap, a big one. GPS data from his cruiser puts him 5 blocks away when the chase began, and he wasn't even assigned to the area where the vehicle was first spotted." The courtroom went still. I'd learned long ago not to rush silence. People process truth slowly, especially when it contradicts what they were sure of a minute ago. Carrington shuffled papers. "Even if Ruiz wasn't present during the initial pursuit, he was part of the arrest." "Correct," I said, "but that's not what his report says. His statement says he saw me behind the wheel. He didn't. That's not a small detail. That's a false claim from a sworn officer. I looked at the jury. That's not just sloppy. That's dangerous. The judge glanced at Carrington. You'll want to get those logs verified, quickly. Carrington gave a stiff nod, but I could already see it. He was rattled. Time to move. Next, I want to address the fingerprint evidence, I said. It's true my prints were found on the steering wheel. Carrington perked up like that was his lifeline. But, I added, we need to ask why that matters, and how those prints got there. I took a few steps toward the jury box. Let's imagine you walk into a department store. You try on a coat. Maybe you zip it up. Put your hands in the pockets. Then you hang it back up and leave. A few jurors nodded slowly. Later that day, someone steals that exact coat. Would your fingerprints on the pockets mean you stole it? No one answered. They didn't have to. The car was parked outside a 7-Eleven earlier that day. I was inside the store with friends. We walked by the car. It was unlocked. I leaned against it. I opened the door out of curiosity. I paused. That was careless, I admit it. But curiosity isn't a crime. Touching something isn't theft. We've all touched things we didn't take. Carrington jumped up. The defendant's prints were on the wheel, not just the door handle. Yes, I said calmly. And if I leaned into the car, which was already open, to look inside, my prints could easily end up there. I turned back to the judge. More importantly, I'd like to know why the forensic specialist who handled the evidence isn't here. Grayson frowned. What do you mean? The state is using forensic evidence to support their case, I explained. But the analyst who processed the prints wasn't subpoenaed. That means I have no way to cross-examine the results, no way to ask about how the evidence was handled, no way to verify the chain of custody. Judge Grayson looked at Carrington. Is that true? Carrington's lips tightened. We didn't anticipate a need for live testimony. That's convenient, I said, keeping my voice steady. Another beat of silence. I could feel the shift in the room now. Not just doubt, but discomfort. I moved to the table, pulled a document from my file, and held it up. And now, Your Honor, I'd like to introduce a piece of evidence the prosecution never mentioned. A statement from the registered owner of the Audi. Carrington looked like someone had just thrown cold water in his face. Mr. Raymond Whitaker, I said, reading from the transcript, told officers, I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid. He was white. Gasps broke across the courtroom. I raised my eyes. That line is from the original police report, the same report the prosecution submitted, the same report they ignored when building this case. I turned slowly toward the jury. The car was stolen. That much is true. But I didn't steal it. I wasn't driving it. I wasn't even near it when it was taken. I was arrested blocks away, walking with friends. The real thief got away, and I got labeled. Judge Grayson sat back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Carrington was speechless. I wasn't done. This case was built on a false assumption, on a shaky report, on fingerprints without context. It was held together by the expectation that someone like me wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't challenge the system, wouldn't know how. I stepped away from the jury box. But I do. And now the courtroom, which had laughed earlier, sat in silence. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a car. It was about how easy it had been for the system to try to bury me, and how close they came to getting away with it. I could feel it, the discomfort in the room growing heavier with each word I spoke. The judge's expression had changed. Carrington wasn't smirking anymore. The laughter from earlier had disappeared, swallowed by something quieter and far more powerful. Doubt. I walked back to the center of the courtroom and held the police report in my hand, like it weighed more than paper. This, I said clearly, is the statement made by Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the owner of the stolen Audi. I looked at the jury, then at the judge. Not a blog post, not something I pulled from social media. This is the original police report, filed the night of the theft. It's been in the system the entire time. I flipped the page and read the key line again, slowly. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid. He was white. I let the words hang in the air. They had this, I said softly, from day one. and they still brought this case forward. Carrington stepped forward, trying to recover. Your Honor, the vehicle was found abandoned shortly after the theft. The defendant was located nearby. That proximity, I turned to face him. So you arrested a black teen found near a stolen car and ignored a witness statement that clearly said the suspect was white? He bristled. We followed procedure. No, I replied. You followed a pattern. There was no need to yell. The facts were loud enough. This wasn't about evidence. This was about assumption. I was arrested not because I matched the description, but because I matched the profile. I was young. I was black. I was in the area. That was all you needed. A few heads in the gallery nodded slowly. Others looked down, uncomfortable. I turned back to the jury. Imagine if I hadn't spoken up, if I'd stayed silent, if I hadn't known how to read a case file or challenge the gaps. How many people has this happened to who didn't have the tools or the courage to fight back? I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was asking for awareness. The prosecution built this case not on solid ground, but on the hope that no one would look too closely. They knew about the owner's statement. They knew about the GPS conflict. They knew the fingerprint analysis hadn't been properly examined in court. But they thought it didn't matter, because the courtroom would believe the badge before it believed the boy. Judge Grayson shifted in his seat. I kept my voice steady. I've been respectful throughout this process. I've answered every question. I've provided documents. I've controlled my tone, because I know how quickly emotion can be used against someone who looks like me. I paused. But just because I'm calm doesn't mean I'm not angry. I turned back to the bench, locking eyes with the judge. This case could have ruined my life. These charges, grand theft auto, resisting arrest, would follow me forever. School, jobs, housing, all gone. Based on assumptions, on shortcuts, on silence. Grayson leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. And yet, I said, I'm supposed to be grateful. Grateful that I had the chance to prove I didn't do something I never did. The silence in the courtroom was thick. A few jurors shifted in their seats. Even the bailiff, who had laughed earlier, was still now. I closed the report and placed it gently on the table. I didn't come here to impress anyone, I said. I came here to protect my future and to make sure this system knows. I saw what you did. I saw how quickly the law turned from protection to weapon, and I wasn't afraid to push back. I looked down for a moment, took a breath, then looked back up. There's a cost to being underestimated, but there's power too. The judge didn't speak right away. Neither did Carrington. The weight of what had been exposed was still sinking in. The story they thought they were telling, a simple prosecution of a guilty teen, had unraveled into something else entirely. A mirror. And for once, they were being forced to look into it. I straightened my shoulders and stepped back from the center of the room. I didn't need to say anything else. The facts had finally spoken, and now the system had to listen. When the judge said, "Case dismissed," it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding finally let go. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. People around me were whispering, some stunned, some relieved. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I gathered my papers slowly, calmly, no fist pumps, no smile, just a quiet, steady exit, because I knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. As I reached the courtroom doors, Judge Grayson's voice stopped me. "Mr. Dawson," he said. I turned, waiting. He hesitated, something he hadn't done all day. Then finally he said, "You should consider law school." I didn't answer. I just gave him a small nod. I didn't need to tell him I'd already been planning on it since I was 13. Outside, the sun was brighter than I expected. A crowd had formed. Reporters, cameras, people with questions. I didn't look at them. I was looking for one person. My mom. She was standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps, arms folded, her eyes locked on me. She wasn't crying, but I could see the worry that had settled in her face over the past few weeks. When I reached her, she shook her head and sighed. "Boy, you scared me half to death." I smiled and wrapped my arms around her. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She hugged me tighter than I expected. Then she stepped back and said, "You always do." We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. She knew what it took for me to stand in that courtroom and hold my ground. But later that night, sitting at the kitchen table, I kept thinking about something. This whole case, it wasn't just about me. It was about how close the system came to crushing another young black man. Not because of what I did, but because of what I looked like and where I was standing. If I hadn't known how to speak their language, how to use the law like they do, my life could have been changed forever. That's not justice. That's luck. And we can't build a fair society on luck. I don't want to be the exception. I want to be part of a generation that changes the expectation. That makes sure the next kid in my position doesn't have to fight this hard just to be believed. So yeah, maybe law school is next. Maybe this courtroom was just my first. But it won't be my last. Because what they tried to bury wasn't just my innocence, it was my voice. And now they know I won't stay quiet. Not for them, not for anyone, not ever again. Not every story ends in a courtroom, but many begin in silence. Jalen's experience is more than just a legal drama. It's a mirror held up to a system that too often gets it wrong. It's part of a growing collection of narrated stories that challenge how we see justice, truth, and who gets to be believed. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending the many unraveled fates of young black men who never got the chance to speak. This story reminds us that change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes from one calm voice refusing to back down, one truth laid bare, one ripple becoming a wave of justice. If this story moved you, let it do more than just sit with you. Share it. Pass it to a friend, a student, a coworker. Start the conversation. Be part of the wave that carries these voices forward. Because what happened to Jalen isn't fiction. It's a reflection of countless untold stories. And the more we listen, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more we change. And that's how justice grows, one story at a time.